At the very beginning of Samuel Beckett's classic play, Waiting for Godot, the character Estragon, when trying to take off his boot, gives up and says, "Nothing to be done." And in response, his companion Vladimir says, "I'm beginning to come around to that opinion. All my life, I've tried to put it from me saying, Vladimir, be reasonable. You haven't yet tried everything." And I resumed the struggle. And then the stage direction reads, "He broods, musing on the struggle." I fear that my generation, Gen Z, are reaching a dangerous sort of dejection. We too seem to be coming round to the opinion that there's nothing to be done. So I wanted to start this new phase of Countdown to Catastrophe videos by tracing for older generations who might not be privy to how political spirits have been affected by the last 16 months, my own experience with that incessant pull to nihilism. On October 14th, 2023, my birthday, my family and I joined a pro-Palestine protest in West Los Angeles against the Israeli attack on Gaza that had already killed 2,600 people in a week. More than those killed on October 7th, and more than those killed during Operation Protective Edge over the course of 2 months in 2014. Now, me personally, I've done a bunch of work with Palestinian refugees in Lebanon and in Greece. I've met countless people who have lived under Israeli apartheid, and I'm using the language of the United Nations and Human Rights Watch. The plight of the Palestinians is one that I care about pretty deeply, especially considering it's my tax dollars that go to supporting the occupation and the parallels between the conditions in the West Bank and segregation in the American South. And while we were marching, I silently cried because I was moved that in Los Angeles, people were finally willing to get into the streets over this occupation that has lasted for many, many decades. And in the coming months, I and countless others kept protesting. So much so that the pro-Palestine movement of 2023 and 2024 was one of the largest anti-war protest movements in US history, rivaling that of the Vietnam War protests. We boycotted corporations, donated money to NGOs, made YouTube videos. Unlike any other ethnic cleansing or genocide in history, and I'm using the language here of Doctors Without Borders and Amnesty International, images of the atrocities were endlessly reproduced on social media. The genocide was live streamed on our phones. I personally watched videos. Come on, fool. That's too much. Now that's too much. I've personally seen the videos of children with holes in their heads, people with white flags getting shot, children starving to death. And this brought a sort of urgency to the activism. We were actually seeing in real time a genocide unfolding, and it was being done with our tax dollars. However, people in power seemed to do everything they could to silence the movement rather than listen. Two of the only allies in Washington that the movement had, Jamal Bowman, Cori Bush, were defeated by AIPAC-funded candidates. When students occupied plazas, administrations called the cops on them. Over 3,000 students across the country were arrested protesting. And where TikTok became this platform where pro-Palestine voices were seemingly getting traction, Congress voted to ban it. And then it was banned for 7 hours. But most importantly, last August, Kamala Harris told anti-genocide protesters,
"You know what? If you want Donald Trump to win, then say that, otherwise I'm speaking."
Then later that month, at the Democratic National Convention, she was appointed without a single vote to be the candidate of the cynically named Democratic Party. And in her speech accepting that nomination, amidst a historic anti-war movement, she promised the US would have the most lethal military on Earth. Most lethal? We wanted less lethal! Kamala Harris's campaign then proceeded to alienate the entire base of the Democratic Party. Instead of endorsing popular policies like Medicare for All or the Green New Deal, she came down hard on the border, thanked Dick Cheney for his service, and just over and over again told us she was not going to ban fracking. And not only did she campaign on unwavering support for Israel, she went back 4 years to give a you to the George Floyd protest movement by branding herself as the top cop in the country. Her entire campaign could be summed up as imperialism with a side of tax credits. While the government she was second in command to sent bombs to Israel that would be dropped on hospitals, causing fires that would burn patients alive in their beds. Now, obviously, alienating the people who historically vote for the Democratic Party, young people, the working class, to try to win this mythic moderate Republican, failed. And Trump won, supported by the richest man in history whose politics are very clearly far right. At a certain point, you reach the conclusion of Estragon with his boot. There's nothing to be done. Over the course of my political awakening, which began early part of 2016 when I was 18 years old, I've witnessed the Sanders campaign, the anti-Dakota Access Pipeline movement, #MeToo, George Floyd uprising, and the Free Gaza protests, only to witness a decline in left-leaning politicians in Washington. The construction of the Dakota Access Pipeline, Keystone Pipeline, Line 3 pipeline, the re-election of a man held civilly liable for rape, an increase of police budgets around the country, and the continuation of the occupation. The day after the election, I was in a coffee shop with my girlfriend, and I was wearing my most political clothing because I was mad. And a young woman, noticing the shirt and hat that I was wearing, came up to us to talk about the election, clearly on the left as well, and very upset with what had just happened. And while we talked, she made a number of suicide jokes. Like, she kept saying, as results were coming in, she was increasingly trying to guess how long a fall from her balcony would be. And what was really crazy was that after she left, I mentioned that to my girlfriend. And it hadn't even registered on her that she did. And I think that's because my generation jokes about killing themselves all the time. Journalist Chris Hedges has identified that the fact that the democratic process is in the hands of an economic elite and the public has virtually no say on policy means that our society is lacking, quote, one of the primary social bonds in a democratic state. The vital shared belief that citizens have the power to govern themselves. That government exists to promote and protect their rights and interests. And without bonds like these, societies are prone to, quote, anomie, a word Hedges borrows from sociologist Emil Durkheim, defined as a state of hopelessness and despair. And what we're looking at in our current state of affairs is not just an inability to affect policy, but an inability to prevent mass death. Take Gaza. Over 66% of Gaza's buildings sustained damage, according to the UN. Possibly hundreds of thousands of people were killed. In December, one study found that 96% of Gazan children felt death was imminent, while 49% of them were suicidal. This was an existential threat for Gaza and Gazans that the public in the US, whose government could and would unilaterally put a stop to, was unable to do anything about, despite massive efforts. How then are we supposed to cope with our powerlessness over even broader existential threats? Take just one example. Climate change. Noam Chomsky and Nathan Robinson, in their recent book, quote, an Israeli climate scientist, Baruch Rinkovic, who, after going over the inevitable misery that climate change will impose on the entire world, concluded, quote, I'm happy I won't be alive. If that's what he thinks, what are we supposed to think? So that's where we're at. That's the update. Everyone in my generation feels powerless and wants to kill themselves. And I'll say, I'm fine. I'm okay. No one needs to check on me. I'm just saying, shit is dark right now. And I just felt the need to say this for generations who might not really understand. But what does this all have to do with Countdown to Catastrophe? Well, this feeling in hopelessness and despair, I refuse to just let go unchecked. In these coming videos, we'll be grappling with these big questions of today. Why is it that there's such a gap between what the public wants and what our government does? Why do intellectuals, media personalities, school administrators, newspapers seem so out of touch and unresponsive to popular input? How is it that we live in an age of despair and alienation, but also one of populist and fascist resurgence? What does it mean to live in a post-industrial society defined by technological progress while centuries-old colonial wounds remain open? And in the process of addressing questions like these, we'll also be looking at how, if possible, we might be able to exercise some subjectivity in this world so overpowered by the influence of economic elites. And in doing so, as a project for me and others who feel like me, maybe we'll figure out some reasons to be hopeful. But I'm not coming in with any answers. I've read several books that have identified how the old dichotomy of activism, humanitarianism has been rendered ineffective as it's been submerged into capitalist frameworks. However, those books didn't really offer an alternative. Baudrillard did, but I'm not gonna do that. Little nugget for people who have read Baudrillard. So I'm gonna start by doing what I know how to do, which is telling you how f***ed up everything is and pointing you towards places that you can donate money. Links below: great organization for Palestinians, my mutual aid organization, Fairfax Mutual Aid. But what I'm hoping is, as we interrogate these problems, new solutions will arise and new means of revolution will assert themselves. And really, I'm fine. You'll know I'm fine because videos will be coming out regularly. And also, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so that publishers will look twice at my book.